Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Nakajima Ki-44-II Hei, also known more formally as the Ki-44-II-C. This is a Japanese Interceptor aircraft coming at a tier of 2 and a battle rating of 2.0. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to the Ki-44-II in general and its particular subvariant, as we have already covered a generic overview of the history behind the Ki-44 Shoki, as may be seen using the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now. We begin thus. The Mark II version of the Ki-44 most likely arrived by the autumn of 1942, starting off with the Ko or the A variant, whereby as an entity the Mark II was an attempt to improve the interceptor capabilities of the fighter, and the Mark II-A was identical to the Mark I-A in all but the engine, replacing the original HAR 41 1250 horsepower radial engine with the uprated HAR 109 1520 horsepower radial engine. And as these engines were of the same diameter, it was a simple process in the design period just to switch them around. This engine change alone meant that the plane's top speed was increased by 24 km an hour or 15 miles per hour to a grand total of 604 km an hour or 378 miles per hour. A total of 355 Mark II-As were to be produced, and the Mark II-A was to be followed by the Otsu or the Mark II-B as of the summer of 1943. Seeing the standard armament of two 7.7mm Type 89 machine guns in the nose and two 12.7mm Ho 103 machine guns in the wings, one to each wing, which was applied to all Ki-44s up to this point, being reduced to just two 12.7mm Ho 103 machine guns in the nose. In the wings, pilots had the option to mount two 40mm Ho 301 cannon, one to each wing, and whilst this did boost the firepower of the plane when it was going up against the more heavily armed and armoured Allied heavy bombers, such as B-29s towards the end of the war in the Pacific, the low overall combat effectiveness of these 40mm cannon outside of specific bomber hunting operations meant that a number of pilots preferred to install two 12.7mm Ho 103 machine guns in the wings instead. A total of 394 Mark II-Bs were to be produced, and these were to be followed by the final Mark II variant known as the Hei or the Mark II-C, which came into service by the spring of 1944. The Hei was to see the standardisation of the 4x12.7mm Ho 103 machine gun armament configuration, whereby two machine guns were mounted in the upper fuselage above the engine, and two were mounted in the wings, one to each wing, and all machine guns had 250 rounds per gun. The Mark II-C also saw the standardisation of the Type 100 reflector gun sight over the original Type 89 telescopic gun sight that had been applied to all previous Ki-44 variants, and a total of 427 Ki-44 Mark II-Cs were to be produced, making this the most produced variant. And interestingly enough, the Mark II-C was to be the final production variant of the Ki-44 in general, with production ending by December of 1944 and the plane seeing combat service all the way through to the end of the war in the Pacific as of 1945. To conclude then, the Ki-44 Mark II remained an effective yet rather unpopular interceptor in the service of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force or the IJAAF. Whilst the improved armament and engine performance boosted the plane's interceptor capabilities, the increased mass of the HAR 109 engine, i.e. 720 kg, being 90 kg heavier than the HAR 41, meant that the wing loading of the plane increased significantly, and this higher wing loading made the plane a lot more unstable in high-speed manoeuvres, making it a very tricky plane to master for its pilots, who much preferred the Ki-84 when it arrived in the skies. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Ki-44 Mark II-C handles in War Thunder. For today's gameplay, we're on the airfield domination map Stalingrad using the following setup. Stealth belts are our machine guns for two main reasons. Firstly, these belts out of the ones available are the most powerful ones for this aircraft, whereby they consist of two armour-piercing incendiary rounds which have the ability to penetrate light armour on a given foe, especially that around the cockpit and the fuel tanks, and then ignite the more flammable sections such as the exposed fuel tanks. The other two rounds are immediate action incendiary rounds, which when they strike a given fuselage will spark and usually ignite any flammable components nearby. This means if we can direct them towards enemy fuel tanks, they will have a very high chance of cooking off enemy aircraft and causing them to burn to death. We also have to consider that these belts have no tracer component associated with any of their rounds, meaning that in boom and zoom passes we can get onto the 6 of our foe, get in close, and they'll be none the wiser to when we open fire until we strike their fuselage, especially if they lack spatial awareness. For our gun convergence, we have a 500 meter gun convergence, as our boom and zoom and interceptor playstyle means that we want to ideally open fire at distances of 400 to 650 meters, and a 500 meter gun convergence will work well for this. And as for our fuel load, we are using our standard 30-minute fuel load to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis then by noting the power of the climb rate on the Ki-44-II-C, whereby we've been able to start at our climb in position of 1000 meters altitude and get to 3600 meters altitude in a single climb, and it is very likely we've been able to push above 4000 meters altitude in that single climb if we were not reacting to the two climbing Yakovlev Yak-1s, who due to their inferior climb rate are in positions of disadvantageous energy. And whilst the closer of the two Yak-1s has already clocked onto our presence and we are faking a pass against them here, their buddy has not, and we're going to swoop in here at approximately 580 km an hour, open fire and pick them off for our first kill, ripping off their right hand wingtip. As we now retain our energy in that boom and zoom pass very nicely, a key trait of the Ki-44-II-C here, we will break over the top of the remaining Yak-1 and force them to stall out. Using our ability to stall out at a speed of 135 km an hour to our advantage, as the Yak-1 stall speed is significantly higher here, and we gradually come around on our rudder via a hammerhead turn, with our rudder being the most powerful control surface available to this aircraft, and we force them to fall out of the sky for our second kill. As we now level out at 3000 meters altitude, we can see how we've retained a good portion of our speed, leveling out at 530 km an hour and still gradually building speed in level flight. And you will find that the acceleration of this aircraft in general from its stall speed all the way up to 425 km an hour is phenomenal, and you do not need to use war emergency power to achieve these results. You can extend these results with war emergency power to 500 km an hour if needs be. And now carrying our momentum through here, we break onto a lag-free 11 who is aware of our presence, but we get a nice pass here and cut them apart for our third kill. We follow through, faking a head-to-head with the Ki-44 Mark 1A, and we instead snap up towards the Beaufort Mark 8 and try to intercept them, having cut right over the side of the enemy spawn here. And we are using our climb rate and our energy retention in boom and zoom passes to make sure our opponents cannot get a lead on us. We graze the Beaufort Mark 8 and do no great damage on them. This goes to show how our machine guns are not too effective against our more heavily armoured and armed opponents, i.e. Beaufort and bombers of the kind. We were a bit hasty in our reload here, and we have the perfect shot lined up on the Ki-44 Mark 1A, that is a pilot error, and we have paid for it, so we'll try to get them in a secondary pass. But now we're in a 2-in-1 engagement in the vertical, whereby we're trying to take on the Ki-44 but at the same time manage the presence of the Yakovlev Yak-1, who is stalling out and has just gone dead vertical from spawn and sprayed towards us. So here the Yak-1 is going to dive down to lower altitude via a split test and not contest us anymore, but the Ki-44 Mark 1A is about to find out how the weaker power of their engine compared to ours will just let them down a little bit, as we now break over the top of them using our rudder here, and we get ready to try and hammerhead, but instead we flatten out over the top and just evade the majority of their fire as they begin to stall out, only taking a grazing portion of their 7.7mm machine gun fire, and if they were in a Ki-44 Mark II-C there, they would have been able to cut us apart. Unfortunately their engine power let them down as already said, and we picked them apart for our fourth kill at long range as they tried to break away. Now having ended that engagement, we begin to go for a little bit more altitude and we go for a more timely reload. As we do so here, we can see how the threats below us are not going for us, instead they're heading towards the centre of the map, and we can begin to go into our boom and zoom passes once again, whereby we've already talked about the acceleration on this aircraft, and we should do so, as well as in level flight, talk about the acceleration when we go into a dive. Now the dive speed acceleration of the Ki-44 Mark II-C is very respectable, with this plane being able to get up to its maximum dive speed of 886 km an hour rather rapidly, as we can see here. Diving down from just over 3000 meters altitude, we're already in excess of 650 km an hour by the time we've dropped 1000 meters altitude, and we're still building. But as we go to higher and higher speeds, we begin to compromise our controllability significantly, and we'll qualify that in a second. But we still have enough controllability at 800 km an hour to hit this lag free out cleanly and cut them apart for our ace in a day. And with our energy retention here, as we level out, we can carry through and attack a Yak-1 at quite a distance, having made quite a sharp turn. And this means we can catch them completely by surprise here to pick up our 6th kill after setting them on fire, as they became engrossed on our F4F. Now carrying through here, we can begin to head off towards the edge of the map on our team side and go into another climb to get back up into a position of superior altitude. and as we do so, let us discuss the controllability of this aircraft at different speeds. Now ideally you want to keep this plane in a speed range between 400 and 550 km an hour, as this is where all three control surfaces will really come to life. The weakest control surface is the elevator, and as we have seen a number of times so far, levelling this plane out after a dive or alternatively getting the nose to go up at lower speeds or even at higher speeds can be quite difficult, making the control surface the weakest of the three. The roll rate of this aircraft is rather good, although not in the league perhaps of some of the very high speed rollers such as the biplanes you can encounter, but it is more than enough to enable you to switch between targets and change directionality on the fly. And the most powerful control surface, the rudder, means that you can snap this plane around in a rudder based turn very rapidly, and in fact you can turn just as tightly on the rudder with this aircraft as you can with the elevators at lower speeds, especially below a speed of 300 km an hour in my experience. So, as you go to speeds below 300 km an hour, your elevator becomes incredibly heavy and very difficult to manage, and this means that loops, especially tight loops as enacted in P-36 Hawks, are going to be very difficult for this aircraft to take itself through in. And as a result, this means that those planes will be able to outloop you very easily. And at the same time, when you go to speeds in excess of 600 km an hour, this plane suffers a rather noticeable lock-up of all three control surfaces, whereby your roll rate, by the time you hit 700 km an hour, will drop to roughly 70% of its standard amount. Your rudder will do the same, and your elevator will also do the same a third time. And at this point here, we have noticed a Hurricane Mark II trying to climb up towards us, but unfortunately they bled out all their energy, and as they try to get away, we achieve a critical hit and rip off their left-hand wing, picking them off for our 7th kill, as they did not anticipate how quickly we could go from just staying above them to swooping down on them to pick them off for a kill, whereby their weaker dive speed acceleration paid the price. And now we cut over the top of B and we have 3 targets, 2 biplanes and a Spitfire Mark I. No clean shots of any of the 3, and as we hit 688 km an hour, we can see how our roll rate lockup and control surface lockup in general meant that we did not want to try and risk getting a shot on any of the 3, but instead we have carried our energy through once again, and we're going to go for the targets over A. We have a Spitfire, a Ki-44-II incoming, a Hurricane and a Messerschmitt 110. So we're going to start off by quickly rolling onto the Hurricane here as they come out of their turn and we're on their 6. We cut them apart by setting them on fire, and we carry our moments through for a quick head-on against the Messerschmitt 110 C4, faking the head-on because we know if we go into the head-on, our very low durability will cause us to fall apart, and instead we snap onto their 6, having already picked up the kill on the Hurricane, and we move into a better position on the BUF 110, and we cut them apart for our 9th kill. Very quickly once again with our 4 machine guns here, and we begin to saunter away from the battlefield, having time that to the point where we've still got 439 km an hour of our speed remaining when we went into that engagement at approximately 600 km an hour, and it means that we can just live to fight another day and not have to worry about any possible intruders at our 6. And we saw earlier when we went into the engagement against the Ki-44 Mark I-A how low the durability of that aircraft is, and the philosophy stays the same with the Mark II-C. This plane cannot take a hit, and at the same time is highly flammable, meaning that even a short burst from 7.7mm machine guns such as those found on a Spitfire will cut this aircraft to pieces. So you need to avoid getting hit wherever possible, and incendiary rounds will have a field day against this aircraft. But on the brighter side, we can see here how we're now making our way back across the battlefield towards airfields B and C. We're able to change places on the battlefield, go to altitude and drop altitude very rapidly, and this means you have a good amount of variability in the energy fighter playstyle, i.e. boom and zoom and playing in that vertical domain. We now swoop down our lag-free 35, who again, completely unaware of our presence, we snap onto their tail, and whilst we do not get a critical hit, we could see their elevator pop off, and they're about to go into the ground for our double ace. And here with a Spitfire on our 6, we just use our momentum to get away, and head towards the Ki-61. As we make our way over, we note how they crashed into our TBF, and we have a Hurricane income instead. So we'll just snap around and go for them, coming from very low, so that way the Hurricane is less likely to detect us, and if they do decide to go down towards us, we can loop over the top. We snap up right behind the Hurricane Mark II-B here, getting nice and close, and open fire. Holding down the trigger, a little bit too close for our Convergence, but we still achieved a critical hit using our nose-mounted 12.7mm machine guns, and that is something to be aware of, that your nose-mounted machine guns are not reliant on Convergence, and we very quickly react to an I-16 Type 5 coming right onto our 6 here, going into the vertical and using our engine power and our roll rate in order to force them to continue to miss and enable our Heinkel 112A0 to get a clean shot to knock them off our 6. And with that, the game comes to its end and we have survived to live another day with no damage being recorded to this aircraft. It is time for us then to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 11 kills, we're able to pick up 39,470 silver lions and 3,603 research points. To defeat the Ki-44-II then, I can recommend one of two approaches. The first is to exploit its weaknesses in its elevator control surface via the means of a turn fight at speeds below 300 km an hour, whereby at its most ideal speeds, this plane will have a turn circle that is roughly the equivalent of that of a Messerschmitt 19 ML1. And as soon as you go to speeds below 300 km an hour, the rather heavy nature of the elevator control surface means that turns become more extended, making the turn circle of the Ki-44 fall behind a good number of its battle rating contemporaries, so you'll be able to outturn it at this point. On top of this, one must also consider that the heaviness of the elevator means that this plane will struggle to perform vertical loops, meaning that planes that can loop very tightly, such as the P-36 Hawks, the Spitfire Mark 1A, the Heinkel 112 and the Ki-43 for comparison, will all be able to outloop this aircraft and snatch their way back onto its six. The alternative approach is to engage the Ki-44 in a head-on pass at longer distances, especially if you're in planes with 20mm cannon armament in the nose. Planes such as the Lag-3 and the Messerschmitt 110 will have a field day here, whereby you'll be able to engage the Ki-44 at distances of 1 km to 1.2 km and cut it apart with accurate head-on fire, whereby the Ki-44 pilot will have the lower durability and the high flammability and will only be able to bring effectively 2 of their 4 machine guns to bear, as 2 of them are based in the wings and are convergence reliant. But by avoiding these two situations today, we can see that we came first by comparison with the rest of our team, whereby we used the Ki-44 Mark II-C in a very similar, if not identical role to that of the Ki-44 Mark 1A, which we reviewed quite a while back and we provided a link to earlier on in this video. The difference here is, thanks to our increase in armament and engine power, we can now extend our capability as the Interceptor and boom and zoom aircraft that we originally acted as in the Mark 1A, but to such an extent now whereby we can avoid getting tangled up in any engagement with our foes. Instead, all we need to do is drift on the horizon at altitude, because we can do so for our superior climb rate at our battle rating and tier and our great overall straight line acceleration, pop into the fight when an opportunity arises, take a couple of shots at foes as we pass through, and then snap away and go back to altitude thanks to our great energy retention. And we should remember now that any bomber we encounter will be one that is within our grasp, as our improved engine means that we now have the performance all the way out to an altitude of 7,000 metres. But if you can keep this plane at any altitude below 5,000 metres, it will be at its most ideal engine performance and overall performance characteristics. So this makes this aircraft a very powerful plane, and one that can be taken to higher battle ratings, such as battle rating 3.0 as depicted today, and still prove very effective. And for this, it will gain the reputation of being the Stealthy Shoki, because it has the ability to get in and out of the fight before anybody knows it was even there. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.